Welcome along to today's workshop, and if you could just please, if you haven't already, just use chat. This is kind of normal protocol when it comes to these type of events in Zoom. You can just use chat to say hello, introduce yourself, let everyone know where you're from. That would be appreciated. So I'll do a little bit of kind of tee up and set up in terms of the focus of today's event and our presenters. And that will be giving us a bit more of an overview of today's theme, which is around synthetic fuels. And then the plan is after the presentations, we'll go into breakout rooms, and that's where we've got an opportunity to collaborate in terms of addressing some of the opportunities, challenges related to the theme that we're focusing on today. So what I'll do just to begin with, if you just bear with me for 2 secs, is just bring up my screen so that you can see where we're starting from today. So today's workshop is very much focused on how the role that synthetic fuels can play in helping to accelerate decarbonisation of heavy duty vehicles. And this is quite an important subject, as I hope you agree, because ultimately this sort of path to net zero emissions in Scotland is one whereby we have to collaboratively develop strategies that enable us to decarbonise different types of vehicles. And heavy duty vehicles, of course, just by their very nature, are slightly trickier to decarbonise based on their duty cycles. So can synthetic fuels play a role in accelerating that? Well, the answer may be yes, but hopefully today we'll learn a bit more from Ewan and from John, our presenters, on how that is going to play out in the months and the years to come. So I think a good way of framing this in terms of the journey we're on is one through, as Mark Twain sort of highlighted, continuous improvement is better than delayed perfection. We have to keep working incrementally towards net zero rather than pushing stuff down the road, so to speak, and trying to develop this perfect solutions. So in terms of the running order for today, the first 30 minutes or so, we're going to focus on kind of scene setting presentations, which we'll introduce shortly. Then we've got breakout sessions, which will last for 35 minutes, and I'll explain a bit more about how they're going to work as well. And then we'll have a brief amount of time to feedback on those breakout sessions, and then a little bit of wrap-up time, hopefully, where I'll signpost some upcoming relevant events and funding that may be of interest to you. And I should also highlight that, as you'll see on the screen, that today's workshop is really only happening due to the support of Heriot-Watt University and Transport Scotland, and indeed John Anderson from Heriot-Watt and Ewan Swaffield from Transport Scotland will be our speakers this afternoon. Okay, so basic housekeeping, folks. If you just please keep your microphones muted during the presentations, and perhaps turn off your camera as well, just to preserve bandwidth and to make sure we don't have any technical glitches. As you've seen, we're recording, so we'll record the presentations. We won't record the breakout rooms, and then we'll come back and we'll record the feedback from the breakout sessions and the wrap up as well. I've already said, please introduce yourself just using chat so we know who you are. And also, if your Zoom name is a little bit different from your real name, could you please change that? Just click on the 3 dots next to your name and change it to your real name. That's just going to make sure that we can assign you to the correct breakout room when we get there. And indeed, any questions that you have, just please leave them until we get into the breakout room as well. Okay, so just to kind of position things as far as today goes, and John's going to talk about this in a bit more detail very shortly, but in the world of synthetic fuels, low carbon fuels, there are lots of different types, different flavors, originate from biological and non-biological sources. And John will again describe the different ones and the pros and cons, the strengths and weaknesses and the challenges. But just to set the scene in terms of where we're going to direct our conversation after the presentations, i.e. when we're in the breakout rooms, I want to kind of zoom in a little bit and look at the renewable fuels from non-biological origins as it's described here, which aka is essentially hydrogen in terms of renewable hydrogen, because ultimately we've only got so much time today to discuss the various different types of synthetic fuels. So this is where we're going to focus today's conversation. There may well be opportunities in the future to zoom in a bit more and look at some of the other types of low carbon fuels, because they all demand their own focus and sort of further discussion. Okay, so without too much of further ado, we have two speakers today. First of all, we have Ewan Swaffield from Transport Scotland, and Ewan very shortly is going to just give us an overview from a policy standpoint on what Transport Scotland are doing when it comes to different types of alternative fuels, the role they play, and of course, what the opportunities are for Scotland. And after Ewan has set the scene from a policy standpoint, John Anderson from Heriot Watt, as you can see there, is going to do a little bit more of a deep dive into the different types of synthetic fuels, how they compare against each other, as I say, from a strengths and weaknesses standpoint, the costs, and ultimately directionally what that means from a sort of research and development standpoint as well. So between now and about past, that's what we'll reserve this time for presentations. And then what I'll come back and I'll do a little bit of signposting when it comes to the breakout rooms that we're going to go into. So what I'm going to do now, just very, hopefully very quickly, is actually I'm going to continue sharing screen. Sorry, I'm going to switch over. Just bear with me. I'm going to stop for a second. And I'm going to drive you in slides. That's what I'm going to do. So just bear with me for 2 secs. Right, so there we go. So I take it everyone can see the slides there. I'm just hoping that you get a nod of approval. So Ewan, if you are there, if you'd like to kick off and just give me the nudge when you want me to transition through your slides.
Okay, I've been trying to adjust iPad and PC so that both at the right angle, probably not quite right for everyone, but can everyone see me at the moment on screen?
I can't see you because I'm seeing your slides, but I'm hoping
Yes.
everyone else can see you.
Yes,
That's a nod. That's a nod.
Right.
Yes.
Actually, my slides will be on screen, so you'll be saved. You'll be saved.
Yes,
the
exactly.
the additional. Right. Okay. If you could just go to the first slide, then, please. That's the blue introduction one.
There you are. It should have changed over for you.
Okay. I'm not seeing that on my screen, so I'm not sure.
What's everybody else seeing? Jenny, Natasha, are you seeing the slides? Missions
Not yet.
Transport? Not yet. Let me go back. How about now?
Not yet.
Is that not shared? Right. Okay, it might be the case I need to screen share. Just base. I need to go back and maybe I stop sharing my screen. Just 2 secs. Right. We'll try again. Second time lucky.
Starting.
Right. Second time lucky.
Right.
There we go. Right. Okay. There you go, Ewan. It should be fine for you now.
Okay. I've just put it onto the presentation view.
Yeah.
You'll get a slightly
that,
bigger picture. Right. Okay. Good afternoon. My name's Ewan Swaffield. I'm from Transport Scotland's Low Carbon Economy Directorate, where I lead on the development of policy on low carbon fuels for Scottish ministers. It's good to be here. I'm looking forward to some of the discussion coming up later on and the other presentation that we're going to get after this. But first, just what I want to do here is to give you a feel for the issues that we're considering in trying to get to a clearer policy position on low carbon fuels for Scottish Government, what activity we're looking ahead to in this area, how we hope to interact with you stakeholders like yourselves. So the Mission Zero slide that's on just now, this is really what we are all about in transport decarbonisation policy in Scotland. This is the headline statement, but there's more detail on the website, which I've highlighted there. If we could go to the next slide, Alex, please.
Just 2 secs. There you go.
Great. As you can see from the other headline statements here, we've also got an economic driver by which we want to reap the maximum benefit from the changes that are going to be required in our transition to net zero. But Mission Zero and the journey to net zero, of course, don't always mean zero emissions. Rather, we're looking at the most effective overall contributor to the whole systems, the whole energy systems move to net zero. Battery electric vehicles and fuel cell vehicles and other electrification support work streams that we're involved in at Transport Scotland are zero emission at tailpipe, but certainly not on a well-to-wheel basis. And of course, there's lots of other variables like that to think about. And this is true of non-electrification options as well. So where a particular route to decarbonisation lies is not going to be a simple choice between zero versus lower emission. And for more challenging areas like heavy duty road vehicles, aviation, marine, some rail freight, and other niche sectors, the choices can really be far from simple. So next slide, please. What do we actually need to know? What's going to work as a powering source for the duties required of a particular transport system? What are the carbon impacts of the various alternatives to the status quo? And are there any Scotland-specific factors that we need to be thinking about in our resources, in our skills base, in our manufacturing and supply chain, and in the sorts of economic benefits that are deliverable? So moving on, we've got the sustainable transport hierarchy here. That's my old friend, this slide. And it's worth noting, if you look at this, that the transport options involving powered sources are all actually quite far down the hierarchy that we should be thinking about. And I like to keep this in mind because whatever decarbonisation route we consider, having it in mind can keep us focused on the bigger picture and from going down sort of policy rabbit holes that come from concentrating too much on a particular topic. So it should always be central to our thinking. Next slide, please, Alex.
Hopefully that's changing for you. Just 2 seconds.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on from that hierarchy, I increasingly think we should be applying the hierarchy principle to the desirability of any energy sources for powering our transport needs. And with these sorts of criteria that I've listed on the side to establish where in the hierarchy a particular option should sit. Next slide, please. A bit facetious, but this is a refrain I often hear, and it's fair to say that we do in Transport Scotland have a preferred route of electrification of transport energy demand wherever that is going to be feasible. Generally, that can deliver the greatest benefits for emissions, for efficiency, and for improved human interaction, basically, with the transport mode, and also most effectively harness Scotland's huge renewable energy resources from one sector into another. So next slide, please, Alex. But what about where electrification isn't a feasible option, either now or in the medium-term future? Well, that's where the wide world of our low-carbon fueled policy comes in, and it is a very wide world from the established commercial options in the marketplace right now, well understood, to seemingly kind of exotic wonder products that often make headlines, but are still actually in a laboratory stage and perhaps will never make it into the so-called real world. Next slide, please. There's definitely a lot to consider with alternative fuel options, which can hugely affect their desirability and their effectiveness. And if not thought through thoroughly, it can be very confusing. So here are some of the main issues as we see them in Transport Scotland that we need to consider when thinking about low carbon fuels. Next slide, please. What, firstly, are the actual carbon reduction benefits? What's the evidence for those? What are the air quality benefits? Are those benefits in tailpipe or are they in life cycle emission costs? There's pros and cons to think about on liquid versus gaseous fuels. There are, sorry, I think we're back to number one, the slide previously, Alex. There we go, thank you. Are there any biomass source feedstock issues to think about? Are there any complex storage considerations for a particular fuel type or transportation considerations for it, or even specific health and safety considerations? And is specific additional support from government likely to be required to get this fuel to a commercial stage, whether that support is via capital injection or into research or into skills development to support it? Next slide, please. And some more things to think about. What's the current availability of the product in the market? What are the overall costs likely to be? How flexible is the fuel going to be across different sectors and different duty cycles? Are there any kind of certification standard issues that we need to think about and get straightened before any move to that fuel type? What are the media and public perceptions going to be? And are there any sweet spots or niches for that product that we believe it will perform most effectively? And is that product's use in transport application going to be more of a priority than for other sectors? Are there any other public acceptability issues to consider, or basically any other barriers that we need to know about. Next slide, please. So as well as the properties of low carbon fuels, the issue of where they've come from can make a really big difference to our thinking in the sustainability and cost and acceptability, and also to the stakeholders that are going to be involved. Whether we're talking about biosourced fuels and whether those are from crop or byproduct or waste sourced biomass, or when we're talking about hydrogen, whether it's electrolysis or biomass derived, green hydrogen, or even blue hydrogen, where we have it fossil derived with the carbon capture applied. And whether it's being used as a combustion fuel in its own right, or to become a feedstock for hydrogen derived fuels. And fuels in the fairly new category that DFT are defining more clearly of RCFs, or recycled carbon fuels. And given the title for our event, I think it would be interesting to hear opinions today on how wide the remit of the term synthetic fuel should be, because all of the above fuel types are synthesized in some way, but I understand from the slide earlier now that we are going to be trying to more tightly define what we're talking about when we speak of synthetic fuels. I don't really want to get hung up on the language, but it's really helpful if we have common understanding of terms that we can share and then build upon that. Next slide, please. So what do we have on the horizon? Well, one thing I've not touched on actually, and not on the slide here, is the fact that a lot of the policy levers, including legislation on fuels and subsidy of low carbon fuels, like the RTFO scheme and duty differentials, are actually reserved to the UK government. So a lot of what's possible in Scotland has to be within the parameters of UK policy. And we do try to work closely with our counterparts in DFT and BEIS, leading on fuels issues. But that's not to say that we can't take a different approach in Scotland and focus on different priorities with the powers and resources that we do have. And I certainly think it's high time for us to have a far clearer policy position on low carbon fuels, which kind of parallels the increasingly well-defined position we have on zero emission technology pathways. And so we'll be refining a programme of work on low carbon fuels over the coming year in Transport Scotland, and that will be with our partners in the SG family and beyond. We want to take stock of the potential supply and demand issues, assess options, gather evidence, and attempt to prioritise areas for support and further study, as well as highlighting and understanding any options or pathways that actually we feel are undesirable and should be ruled out or caveated, or where they're likely to have unwanted effects. And some of the activities in this space are, well, a biomethane opportunity study with Scottish Enterprise. We have just completed, and a report by ZEMO and NNFC, the consultants, is just about to be finalised for publication. It's our intention to have an expert stakeholder workshop fairly soon to help us shape the rest of the programme to come. Really want to get to a position where we can set out well-evidenced options for ministers on wider policy priorities, whether that includes things like collaborations or further research or trials or demonstrations. And this programme is going to have interactions with quite a lot of other pieces of work across Transport Scotland, various parts of Scottish Government and agencies, and other partners' work streams. But specifically, I want to mention the Scottish Government Energy Strategy Refresh. We'll have a very big link to work on low carbon fuels. Even more so, perhaps, the Bioenergy Action Plan work that Scottish Government are undertaking, and areas of economy and zero waste policy in Scottish Government. And of course, the UK Government's low carbon fuels strategy, which is due to come to fruition and publish something towards the end of 2022, I believe. That's on their current timescale anyway. Next slide, please, Alex. Thanks. So we're very keen to have input from stakeholders, lots of ways we can interact and engage, but we really need input to scope out the future programme and to help us make the most effective policy via some of the routes I've put on the slide there. Next slide, please, Alex. So that's all I really want to say at this point, and thanks for attending, and thanks for your attention so far. Looking forward to the discussions, as I said. Please do get in touch with me at a later point if you want to discuss anything specific. My email address is up there on the screen. So I will say thank you.
Thank you, Ewan. And I think that set the scene very well. Just really in terms of, there's a lot metaphorically to chew on, and a lot for, a lot of decisions that have to be made, just given the breadth and the depth of different types of synthetic fuels. So I think really to build on that, I'm now going to hand over to John Anderson from Heriot-Watt University. And John, if you are able, hopefully at your end, you're able to share your slides and just give us a bit more depth that sort of builds on sort of Ewan's opening piece from a policy standpoint, that kind of looks more technically as well as economically at some of the different opportunities and challenges when it comes to synthetic fuels, and particularly the role they can play in hopefully accelerating decarbonisation of heavy duty vehicles. So John, over to you.
Thanks, Alex. I will try to share. Hopefully technology is with me.
We hope so. Let's have
Can
a look.
you see those slides?
There we go. Perfect. Yeah. If you just go into slideshow and we're good to go.
Yeah. All right. So my name is John Anderson. So I'm the Associate Director for Low Carbon System and RCCS, and I'm Hardin Strategic Champion for the Energy Technology Partnership. Just to go through a little bit of my different roles under the Research Center for Carbon Solution and having up the low carbon systems. We're looking very much on life cycle analysis and see how we can get sustainable energy solutions. And the message that Ewan was having about very important to look at the low carbon systems, it looked like we have been coordinating messages, but that was just spot on. Other parts of the Research Center for Carbon Solution, we're looking very much towards carbon capture and storage. If we're going towards synthetic fuels, we need carbon from somewhere because we need to reactivate hydrogen. So carbon capture and getting that the right low carbon footprint and low cost is quite important. We have another area looking at carbon dioxide utilization, different conversion strategies and different catalysts and so forth. And the last but not least is negative emission technologies. So reacting carbon with, for example, limestone, so you can store it and lock it in rock is one of the approaches we have. So we have about close to 50 people working and around 30-40 million in funding just for now. And the second part I think would be quite important is that I'm a co-investigator for the Industrial Decarbonisation Research Innovation Center. And we are about 20 million in funding with about 10 million match from industry, and heavy duty vehicles for transport within the industrial sector is very important for them. So they're looking for synthetic fuel or e-fuel as one of the ways to decarbonize for that. Not only, as Ewan was mentioning, you need to have the fuel there, but you also need to look for different solutions that you can integrate. So it needs to be aligned with policy. And also it needs to be skills available so people know how to utilize the different decarbonization options that are there. And we work for IDRIC to do that. And last, we just touch into the Hardin theme. I know I said heavy duty vehicles that we have today, but Hardin is, as an end user, quite important for transport. But most importantly is for different industrial and other fuels than hydrogen, so what we call power to X. So we can use hydrogen to produce e-fuel or different synthetic fuels. And I'm going to touch into how the importance of sustainable and cost-effective hydrogen production is probably key to take that forward. And I'm going to touch into Scotland's, what I think Scotland has a great potential to make a change and turn away from fossil fuel and become a sustainable synthetic fuel producer. So just let's start with synthetic fuels. What are the main benefits from synthetic fuels? So if you go down in the bottom left corner, you can see the batteries that are there. Batteries are great for in-town transport and very end in terms of the vehicle itself, have no emissions to it. However, quite a lot of industry have some problems with the storage of energy that you have there. So how you can do for heavy transport vehicles, long distance is an issue. Now, hydrogen is a good alternative to that. However, if you look at liquid hydrogen, the storage energy density and the specific energy is still quite low, but you can get different high pressurized system of hydrogen and liquid hydrogen into that, but you will need to retrofit a lot. So still some way away, and we're working for ETP to how to get in some demonstrators on that. What we have today is different bio fuels like biodiesel and bioethanol. Still, the specific energy is slightly higher, but if you compare it with synthetic fuel, it's superior in terms of its performance. So that's why it's a very good drive towards synthetic fuel. Not only can you use existing vehicles that you have today, the storage density is really, really nice. If you can get the carbon footprint down to 0 or even negative, that'd be great. And storage is not an issue, and people know how to handle synthetic fuel, so we can just replace synthetic fuel with the fossil fuel that you have. So different ways that people have been doing it so far, and this is just taken a staff roadmap just to showcase a little bit what Ewan was saying as well, the complexity of the whole thing and different options that people have, and it can be quite confusing sometimes. You can use fossil fuel directly to make synthetic fuels. You can hydrotreat different bio leftovers, and this is municipal solid waste, for example. One key aspect of there is in the middle there saying syngas or synthesis gas. We're going to touch into that. So synthesis gas is probably the key technology to take forward in terms of making syngas or e-fuel. And that is a well-established technology, and we know that very well. And it's more from a techno-economic standpoint that we want to get that in. So if you can get the price of hydrogen down and we can get the price of power down, then the syngas option will become very viable to make synthetic fuels. So just touching into the cost then, and obviously this is just indicative costs. With the unfortunate war in Ukraine now, the prices have changed a lot. So, but just as a rough guide, if you look all to the left, you can see crude oil is very good in terms of feedstock cost, varying quite a bit, but historically quite very competitive in terms of fuel style cost, and very good in terms of process cost. So as of is now, crude oil has both feedstock cost and process cost as working with them. So we need to try to find some ways to get in sustainability to try to compete with fossil fuel. One way to do that is biofuels that we touched into, which is not synthetic fuel, but they are quite good. So if you can use biofuels as a source of the energy for synthetic fuel, that might be one way to go forward. And we have been doing that at Harriet Watt. You can start using different byproducts, like when it's a solid waste and you take a gate fee, then you actually get the feedstock cost down. And there are several demonstrators within UK even looking at municipal solid waste into sustainable fuels. And the nice thing is the feedstock costs are quite low. You go into a circular economy approach, which is great. However, the process cost is significant on that. And you can see the hydrogen is still, feedstock cost is slightly higher than crude oil. Process cost is going down, but still a challenge for hydrogen. So we're working for ETP to try to get down both process cost and feedstock cost by the overall network that we have and the academic champions we have on that. So cost is an issue. What about carbon footprint? We can see for most of synthetic fuels, the line in middle is from a refinery. If you go into coal, for example, coal has a very high carbon footprint, but if you go to synthetic fuels such as the Sasol from South Africa, they're using coal because of the cost competitiveness of the process, which is unfortunate, but that's just how it is when you go away from Europe. So coal is normally the way it's used for synthetic fuels in the non-Western countries. What we have been trying to push is more and more biomass, so going towards the right in that figure. And as you see, the more you mix in biomass, the carbon footprint is going down compared with refinery, but still quite high, taking into consideration different like fertilizer cost, transportation cost of the biomass. The only thing you can go forward is if you start with looking into carbon capture with utilization, and you can see there you can become carbon negative. The nice thing is what the UK, especially through drugs processes, are looking into that. So we can get synthetic fuels where you're linked up with carbon capture and storage, and we can get carbon neutral or even carbon negative. So that's a very nice way to go forward. So how can we do that then? In Heriot-Watt, we have been putting forward what's something called co-electrolysis. Basically, that is taking steam and CO2. So the CO2 can come from different processes. Very important what the life cycle footprint or the carbon footprint of the CO2 is low. We're working with direct air capture, so taking the CO2 from the air. You can get the CO2 linked in with utilization as well. Now the co-electrolysis is then converting the water and the carbon dioxide into pure oxygen on one electrode, and synthesis gas, which is carbon monoxide and hydrogen on the other side. And then the carbon monoxide and hydrogen is the one used forward to synthesize the green e-fuel. So that will be the synthetic fuel. So very important there then to find out where you can get the CO2 from, and also drive down the cost of the hydrogen, because the hydrogen might be an issue when you do co-electrolysis. So we have been putting forward a waste biomass conversion using the spare oxygen from the co-electrolysis, so that we can get an extra amount of hydrogen from that, and we can get some heat for the process as well to drive down the overall carbon footprint of the process. So the overall conversion of carbon monoxide and hydrogen into e-fuels is not a new process. There's about 20 companies throughout Europe that are looking into e-fuels and synthetic fuels. So in principle, you will need to have power. So if you look at the blue crude from Audi, it's just one process. There are Nordic blue crude as well. There's a raft of different companies. This is just one example that they're putting forward, but just illustrate what you need. Power, you need affordable power. That will go down through the electrolysis conversion, and within the hydrogen theme with ETP, we're working to get down the cost of the electrolysis. The electrolysis then is producing hydrogen, and that is combined with carbon dioxide, for example, from directly air capture, or from different processes it could that have low carbon footprint. You then need to do something called reverse water gas shift. So the CO2 is converted into carbon monoxide, and then you mix it with the more hydrogen, and then you do a Fischer-Tropsch synthesis, like we have in the catalytic conversion number 3 in our process, and then you will get e-diesel from that with a low carbon footprint. So I think the key forward here is how can we get affordable hydrogen, affordable power, and affordable carbon. If you can get all those three together, we have the great mix for synthesis fuel or e-fuel. And I think that this is my last slide. I think Scotland is in a very, very good position here. This is a historic production of crude oil and natural gas. The crude oil is in red, and the natural gas in blue. And you can see from around 2000 down to 2010, the production has gone down. Obviously, there has been a big shed in workforce, which have been an issue for Scotland, but the production has stabilized and it follows a little bit the crude oil prices. Now, if you have a look at the yellow line, that is how wind power has been going up. So that's the potential for e-fuel. So Scotland is pushing very hard in terms of sustainable wind. If we can play the card right, we can use that sustainable wind to do hydrogen production from that, from electrolysis of green hydrogen. And then also if you can do power to X or synthesis fuel, then we can get a very good synthesis fuel production from that. And that can compete with the current production of oil and gas. Just to make sure what the current position is around 5 gigawatt worth of, of wind. Obviously, the Scottish government is pushing very strongly to get up to around 40 gigawatt by 2030, and the ScotWind auction about 25 gigawatt was very encouraging. Just to note that Scotland has probably the largest wind potential in Europe, with a potential of about 260 million tons of e-fuel. So Scotland has the potential to become a major player in e-fuel and supply Europe with carbon neutral or carbon negative fuel that can decarbonize heavy vehicle transportation. So that was my last slide. If you need any more information, my Harriet Watt email is John Anderson. If you want to get involved with IDRIC, please contact the info at IDRIC, and also some more information on the idric.org website. So thank you very much, Alex. I think that's me.
Yeah, thank you very much, John. Okay, so in terms of future workshops around zero emission mobility, we have a couple that are scheduled over the coming months. And the next one for your calendars at the end of May. And that's going to focus on how natural, it's really about composites. So composites, again, being an important pathway to help to lightweight vehicles of different sizes and ultimately reduce their emissions as well. So the particular subject we're going to focus on in partnership with Robert Gordon University is how natural fibre reinforced composites can help to reduce EV life cycle emissions. So that's on the 25th of May. On the 16th of June, we're partnering with Glasgow University to look at how advances in thermal management can help to optimize heating and cooling of electric vehicles. That's another important point because it's true for buildings and it's true for vehicles. There's quite a lot of wasted heat from electric vehicles. So advances in thermal management and heat pump systems can help to recover quite a lot of that wasted heat and can then reuse that for heating and cooling vehicle cabins. So there's quite a lot of work happening around that area, and that includes the team at Glasgow University. So that's what we're going to focus on the 16th of June. And then on a date that we'll confirm in the very near future, we're also going to look at behaviour change as well, and particularly how COVID-19 and climate change is changing travel mobility behaviours in Scotland. So through COVID pandemic, the team at Napier University's TRI have been undertaking some research to understand what those changes are from a travel behaviour mobility standpoint. So that particular workshop will focus on that. Okay, and then just a final bit of signposting for you. We've got a few funding calls, either directly through ETP or through other organisations coming up in the not too distant future. Probably the most prominent one from an ETP standpoint, we have our open call for zero emission mobility funding. So that's grant funding up to £10,000 to get support from a Scottish university to help with development of a product or service prototype, and that's open to SMEs in Scotland. And then we also, up in Aberdeen, the Net Zero Technology Centre have recently announced their Open Innovation Programme. So in the first tranche of that, that's offering a total pot of £7 million to support net zero related innovations. And that's open to any company anywhere in the world. And then finally, BES have recently announced their Industrial Hydrogen Accelerator Innovation Programme. So while they haven't actually confirmed the grant funding for that, that's going to be announced in April. The idea, of course, is that's going to be very much focused on lots of innovations to do with accelerating at an industrial scale the production distribution of hydrogen. And turning to events that are coming up over the next few weeks. And next week, we have Scottish Engineering are holding a net zero programme. It's part of the net zero skills programme, and it's around building a smart roadmap to net zero. So that's on the 22nd of March, between 8:30 and 10, as you can see. Sustainable Mobility Cluster Builder, that's our sort of partners that we work with at DTP, are doing a session around light goods vehicle decarbonisation. And the following day, BES, relating back to that industrial hydrogen accelerator programme, are holding a virtual networking event for anyone who's interested. And then finally, on the 29th, we have the Net Zero Scotland Conference, and that is free. If you're an academic, it's free to attend, so you can sign up. So what we'll do is, and probably do separately by email rather than today, is send you out the links if you can't find them already for those different funding calls and for those events. Okay, so I think that's just about a wrap for today. If you want to contact us, details are there, including my email address. I'd like to thank again Ewan from Transport Scotland and John from Heriot Watt for very insightful presentations. I think it really brings to light where we are today and a lot of the work and collaboration that's going to be needed to move things forward when it comes to decarbonisation of heavy duty vehicles. If you have any questions, thoughts or reflections on today, you can either email me or, as I said earlier, the Padlet board is going to be there. It's going to be live, so you can continue to use that to add in some further thoughts or perspectives over the next few hours or couple of days. And I think with that, I think I'll thank you all, give you a little bit of time back, and hopefully see you at one of our future events in the next few weeks and months ahead. So thanks everyone, and have a good rest of the day.